Imagine waking up tomorrow and the entire architecture of your daily life has shifted in one silent, fundamental way. Not a revolution, not a collapse, not a disaster, just the quiet disappearance of a system so embedded in how you move through the world that you have never once experienced a full day without it shaping your choices before you were even conscious of making them. Money is gone. Not the things it bought, not the skills people have, not the relationships or the knowledge or the infrastructure that exists, just the medium itself. The number that follows you from the moment you are born to the moment you die, quietly determining what you eat and where you sleep and how much of your one life you spend doing things you would never have chosen freely. Gone. And what remains is the question this thought experiment is actually asking, which is not really about economics at all. It is about you, about what you would do, who you would become, and what the shape of a human life actually looks like when the price tag is finally removed from everything. The first thing that would change, before anything dramatic, is time. The way you experience a Tuesday morning would become almost unrecognizable. Right now, for most people, time is not really yours. It belongs in chunks to whoever pays for it. The hours between roughly 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening are, for the majority of human beings alive today, spoken for before they arrive. You trade them for the number that lets you exist. And around those hours, you arrange the rest. Sleep enough to function. Eat fast enough to get back. Rest just enough to do it again. The structure of most lives is built around the requirement of earning rather than around any genuine sense of what a human being actually needs to flourish. Remove money and that entire scaffolding comes down overnight. What you are left with is something that would feel, at first, deeply disorienting. An open day with no financial reason to be anywhere specific. For many people, the first honest response to that freedom would not be joy. It would be a mild and unsettling panic. Because most of us have never actually practiced knowing what we want when survival is not the organizing principle of the question. Think about the work itself. Without money, the concept of a job as we currently understand it dissolves almost entirely. What remains is contribution. And contribution, it turns out, looks radically different when it is chosen rather than required. The research on intrinsic motivation, built most thoroughly by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan across several decades, shows consistently that human beings have a deep and genuine drive toward competence, toward mastery, toward doing things that feel meaningful and connected to something larger than immediate personal gain. This drive does not need to be manufactured or incentivized. It exists naturally. What tends to suppress it, and this is the part the research finds repeatedly, is the introduction of external rewards as the primary reason for doing something. Pay people to do what they already loved, and their enjoyment of it measurably decreases. Remove the pay, and ask what they would still do anyway, and something interesting surfaces. Most people, given genuine freedom, move toward usefulness, toward making things, fixing things, teaching things, growing things, caring for things. The content of human contribution does not disappear without money. It reorganizes around what people are actually drawn to rather than what the market happens to value. The relationships in your life would transform in ways that are difficult to fully imagine from inside the current system. Think about how much of your social world is quietly shaped by financial proximity. Where you live determines who your neighbors are, and where you live is determined by what you can afford. Where your children go to school, which is determined by property values, shapes their entire social environment before they are old enough to have preferences about it. The friendships you have time for are constrained by how much of your time is already committed to earning. The romantic partnerships people choose are influenced, more than anyone finds comfortable to admit, by financial compatibility and security. Remove money, and all of these invisible sortings dissolve. You would live near people based on genuine preference or practical cooperation rather than shared tax bracket. Community would reform around proximity and shared need and actual human compatibility rather than around the economic stratification that currently determines who spends time near whom. The loneliness epidemic that researchers have been documenting with increasing alarm across the last several decades is not simply a technology problem or a cultural one. It is also a structural one. People are isolated partly because the economic system requires arrangements of life that are not naturally conducive to connection. Separate houses, long commutes, overloaded schedules, the privacy that wealth purchases, and the isolation that poverty enforces. Without money, the architecture of daily life would almost certainly become more communal by necessity, and possibly by genuine preference once people remembered what genuine community actually felt like. Food would change in ways that reach deeper than cuisine. Right now, what most people eat is determined primarily by cost, convenience, and the industrial systems built around producing calories at the lowest possible price. The distance between a human being and the actual source of their food has never in history been as vast as it is today. Most people in the modern world have no direct relationship with the land, the animals, or the processes that feed them. They have a relationship with a price point and a shelf. Without money, the question of food becomes immediate and local in a way it has not been for generations. People would grow things, not as hobby gardening, but as genuine participation in feeding themselves and the people around them. The knowledge of how to cultivate, preserve, prepare, and share food would move back from the category of optional lifestyle interest into the center of daily human life. And with it would come something that has been studied extensively in the psychology of well-being, which is the deep satisfaction of direct relationship with the physical world, of making something with your hands that sustains life, of understanding where things come from and how they work. This kind of embodied competence produces a quality of groundedness that no amount of purchased convenience has ever been able to replicate. The creative life of human beings would expand in ways that are almost impossible to calculate. Right now, the creative impulse in most people is rationed. It gets the hours left over after the earning is done, which for most people means it gets very little. The novelist who works in accounting, the painter who manages logistics, the musician who answers phones. The gap between what people do to survive and what they would do if survival were already handled is, for the majority of human beings, enormous. And that gap is where an extraordinary amount of human potential simply evaporates across a lifetime without ceremony or acknowledgement. Without money, there is no longer a division between the life that pays and the life that matters. There is just the life. And the evidence, from flow research, from creativity studies, from the psychology of meaning, all points toward the same conclusion. Human beings who spend their time doing things they find genuinely absorbing and meaningful are not just happier in the moment. They are more psychologically resilient, more socially connected, more physically healthy, and more likely to produce things that are genuinely useful and beautiful to others. The cost of the current system is not just personal, it is civilizational. The things that were never made because the people who could have made them were busy surviving instead.